This story is about crossing the line with my mother-in-law. My father-in-law was often overseas for business trips, leaving my mother-in-law alone most of the time. I was a young man who fell for my mother-in-law's intentions and acted according to her wishes. My parents ran a lodging business near the beach. Furthermore, my father went out at dawn to catch fish and sold sashimi and spicy fish stew. Back in the day, there were many guest houses near the beach, and guests settled their accommodation and meals there. So our house earned a good income during the peak season. As more cars became available and people wanted to see the sea not only in summer, but also in other seasons, my parents' business was booming. Our house was near the coast and near the beach, so the sea was so familiar that it was even boring. Knowing how I felt, my parents sent me to my uncle's house in the city during the holidays, so I could experience city life. They desperately hoped that I would go to a university in the city. At that time, my uncle was a person who often went on overseas business trips. My uncle and mother-in-law met in college and got married, but they didn't have children. My mother-in-law worked as a tutor at the time and seemed to be living quite busy. I ended up going to a university, and my parents continued to run the lodging business and restaurant in the same place. I ended up going to university in the city where my mother-in-law lived, but it wasn't close to her house, so I lived in a dormitory. My mother-in-law told me to come and play whenever I wanted on weekends or holidays, and I eagerly accepted her invitation. Strangely enough, my uncle was never home when my mother-in-law called me. My uncle was often on business trips for half a month, and once he was on a business trip for 100 days. So my mother-in-law seemed to be lonely living alone. My mother-in-law had come to play at our house before she got married, and she was very kind to me. I spoke in the dialect of the region where I grew up, but my mother-in-law spoke standard English. She told me to study hard and live in a big city, and I was fascinated by her sophisticated way of speaking, which was different from my mother's rough dialect. I set a goal to go to university in the city where my mother-in-law lived in order to meet a sophisticated and smart woman like her and prepared for the one good thing about being a university student was the long holidays. Especially during the summer holidays, I went down to my parents' house and helped them. I must have been a bit naive. I had no sense. I saw many couples coming to the beach, and they seemed like families, but in many cases, they were not families. I had heard that there were a lot of extramarital affairs in the world, but when I worked at my parents' guest house during the holidays, I saw quite a few couples who smelled fishy. But to think that I would end up having that kind of relationship with my mother-in-law once I became a university student. My mother-in-law started contacting me more casually. I felt comfortable with her, and the more we met, the more I thought this must be what it feels like to have a close older sister. One day during the summer vacation, while I was at home, helping my busy parents and considering spending more time there, I received a call from my mother-in-law. She wanted me to come to her house. When I asked why, she said a big shopping mall had opened near her house, and she wanted to go there with me. Being innocent, I thought the peak season was over and my parents, who were now used to city life, told me to go straight up. I arrived in the city by express bus and went straight to my uncle's house. My mother-in-law had a big clothing store downtown, and she wanted me to accompany her. The subway was very familiar to me. We looked around the shopping mall with my mother-in-law, bought clothes, and even bought food from a famous street food vendor. My mother-in-law, with a flushed face, said to go home and sleep. There were 3 rooms in my mother-in-law's house, and I thought I could sleep in the small room. My mother-in-law, with a flushed face, tried on the new clothes and asked if they looked pretty while spinning around. She looked so cute that I replied, "You still look like a young lady. And you have a great figure." She said her legs were hurting and she needed to rest a bit. She must have been exhausted from walking around that big shopping mall. After taking a shower, my mother-in-law came out in comfortable clothes. We watched TV while loosening our tense muscles. And before we knew it, it was midnight and we were about to go to bed. But my mother-in-law said she was scared without my uncle, so she slept with the fluorescent light on even at night. I told her I would sleep in the small room and to call me if anything happened and to turn off the light and sleep without fear. But she asked me to stay by her side until she fell asleep. The time men fear the most is shopping time, and I was exhausted from shopping with my mother-in-law without any complaints. I thought I should politely refuse if the girl I'm dating in the future asks me to go shopping. I felt like I could fall into a deep sleep as soon as I lay down in the small room, but it seemed like my mother-in-law was taking me too lightly. Can it be acceptable to ask me to stay by her side? No matter how close we are as nephew and aunt, I'm an adult too. My mother-in-law lay on the bed and covered herself with a thin blanket, and I, who have a high body temperature, lay at the end of the bed in shorts and a short-sleeved shirt. Continuing from the previous story, set in the United States. Here's the translated version. My aunt seemed to fall asleep soon after I laid down next to her, saying she was no longer afraid. I left a fan on at the foot of the bed, and the cool breeze was blowing. Thinking my aunt was asleep, I carefully rose and walked to the door to turn off the light. At that moment, she said, "Don't go yet, I'm scared." She had woken up at the sound of the light switch. I reassured her, "I'll stay here. Don't be afraid and sleep." She told me to sleep comfortably next to her, to which I grumbled, "How can I sleep comfortably with a beautiful woman like you next to me?" I was really tired, and it was really difficult not being able to go to my room. She then whispered, "Shall we make a secret then?" And we became one. It was my first time that night. It was really embarrassing, but it ended in a short time. She said, "Your uncle, who is always working late and going on business trips abroad, has never held me. He was so proactive when we were dating." She said it in a sad tone. After that day, she suggested we spend time together until the semester began. I had a week left until the start of the semester, so I planned to meet up with friends in city and stay at a friend's house if possible. After what happened with my aunt, all I could think about when meeting my friends was that I should go to her house as soon as possible. We spent every day together, and in the late afternoon, I would hang out with my friends and come home to find her back from teaching her tutoring classes. She seemed exhausted from teaching more than 10 homes a day, so I sat her down and massaged her shoulders. She appreciated the strength in my hands, saying, "You're good because you're a boy." We spent late evenings together in the master bedroom. After preparing and eating dinner, when the semester started, my uncle returned from his business trip. I felt embarrassed when I received a call from my uncle, who said he would buy me a meal on the weekend if I had time, but my aunt and I were shameless and acted well. We were nothing more than nephew and aunt. She hinted to me that this week was her ovulation period and that my uncle knew. She said we should be careful this week and meet next week. I was somewhat relieved that she seemed to have at least the common sense that she should have her husband's child. We met avoiding my uncle's eyes. I waited for my aunt's call and had a good time taking advantage of brief moments. She announced her pregnancy a few weeks later, and I sincerely congratulated her. As expected, my uncle went on another business trip, but he said he asked the company not to go on a business trip when she gives birth. My aunt contacted me to meet again when she was in the middle of her pregnancy and felt comfortable. I cautiously agreed to meet. She gave birth to a beautiful daughter naturally, and anyone could see that she looked just like my uncle. She said that although my uncle no longer goes on business trips abroad, she thinks she gets along better with me, and she made various excuses and asked me to come to her house. In retrospect, I think she was leading me. For example, she would say that the baby formula was running out and she needed it urgently, or that she had some time before my uncle came home and thought I could get it faster. However, her cute lies were quickly discovered when I found the baby formula while looking for something in the kitchen sink. The aunt who took my hand and went to the small room when the cousin fell asleep. It's too cute to think about. Now I meet my aunt outside. My cousin is now a college student, and I have become a father. Although the number of meetings with my aunt has drastically decreased, we can't break up because we get along so well. Even if that meeting is once a year, I feel more energized than tired after meeting my aunt. She's now in her 50s and doesn't have to worry about pregnancy, so she's urging to see me more often. I keep putting her off, saying I'll make time. There are no secrets in the world, so I should be more careful when meeting her.